You know those mysteries that span generations? They always seem to like really grab our attention, don't you think?
Hmm.
And, well, that's kind of what we're doing today, diving into one that's stretched over like 50 years.
Wow.
The case of Moren Brewbaker. She was just 17 when she was found dead back in 1971.
Mm.
And it went cold, this case, for decades.
Really?
Yeah. So her family was left with way more questions than answers,
Oh,
really.
that's got to be tough. So what makes this deep dive so interesting?
Well, it's all the different sources we have to work with. Like, we're not just looking at the, usual police reports, right?
Yeah.
We've got interviews with Moren's mother and sister, and get this, excerpts from Moren's own diary.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. You really get to see things from multiple angles then, don't you?
Exactly. We're going to try to put this puzzle together, use all these pieces. I've got faded photographs, whispered memories, and the words of, well, a teenager who's gone too soon.
That's a powerful.
The big question we're exploring today: what does it really take to get justice after 5 decades? And how does a weight like that impact a family?
It's a huge question. And, this isn't just about solving a murder. It's also a window, right, into a different era, societal attitudes back then, and how forensic science has changed so much over time.
Absolutely. So, okay, let's just start by, getting to know Moren a little bit. We know from what we've gathered that she was kind of a firecracker, like a wild child, maybe.
Oh, interesting.
She loved fashion, music, and was super close to her younger sister, Lisa.
Gotcha. And Lisa, well, she's 13 years younger than Moren. She really gives us this vivid picture of her, describes her as like cool, fun, the life of the party. And there's this really touching story about how Moren taught Lisa how to sing Silver Bells in the car. And it's something that Lisa still holds ear even after all these
It's
years.
those little moments that make her real, don't they? Like, they remind us she was, more than just a victim. To understand her story, though, I think we really need to step back in time to, like, 1971.
Yeah, that's a whole different world, isn't it?
Totally.
Imagine the drinking age was 18 back then.
Yeah.
Sioux City, Cedar Rapids, totally different places. You could buy a comic book, get a cup of coffee, all with a dime. It was a world with a different pace, I think. Different social norms.
Really sets the scene, right?
Yeah.
So with that as our backdrop, Moren's story starts to unfold. She eloped at 15, and her husband ended up in prison, so she moves closer to the prison to be able to, visit him.
Right.
Think about that at 17, trying to, like, navigate life, keep a relationship going with your husband who's in prison, and all this in a time with no cell phones, no internet.
Right. I mean, communication back then was much slower, wasn't it?
Oh, for sure.
Moren would send photos and letters back home, maybe call if she could afford it, and then suddenly everything just stopped.
Yeah, it was like radio silence. She missed a paycheck, didn't show up for work, missed a visit with her husband. Her family knew in their gut that something was very wrong.
Oh, I bet.
So Moren's mother reports her missing. But the police response is, well, it's pretty dismissive.
Really? Why is that?
Well, here's where those societal attitudes come into play,
Yeah.
right? Back then, the police didn't really prioritize these cases of runaway girls. It was a different era.
Sad, but true.
And these assumptions, well, they really impacted the investigation.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
So a week passes, and then Moren's body is found. And the location, the scene itself, instantly unsettling. It was 2 teenage boys who discovered her body. She was lying on the trunk of a junked car in a ravine near a landfill. Clothes were all messed up, no shoes on her feet.
Wow, that's awful.
And this is big, but her feet were clean. Like, if she'd walked to that spot, her feet would have been dirty.
Right.
So it really points to her body being placed there, staged.
Definitely suspicious.
And get this, there was a pillowcase with bloodstains nearby, which again suggests she was transported, maybe while unconscious.
Yeah, the scene, it sounds like it was deliberately manipulated.
100%.
Ah,
So the big question, right? How did Moren die?
yeah.
Autopsy shows a massive blow to the head. So most likely a surprise attack. And she could have been unconscious, like, for days before she actually died.
Oh my goodness.
And there's evidence that points to a possible sexual assault, too, which just, adds another layer of brutality to this whole thing.
It's just horrific.
It is. But in the midst of all this tragedy, there's this amazing response from the community. Neighbors raised money for the funeral. The church donated a burial plot.
That's really something. I mean, it shows that, even in such darkness, there's still compassion. You see how communities can come together, to support those who are grieving.
Absolutely. But of course, alongside the grief, there's this burning need for answers. Who could have done this to Moren?
Exactly.
At first, there's all these rumors and accusations flying around, pointing fingers at some of Moren's friends. But none of those leads really go anywhere.
So what happened then?
Well, then a name comes up. And this name, it would hang over the case for decades.
Uh-oh.
George Smith. He was an older man, 53 at the time. He owned a liquor store near Moren's apartment.
Okay, so what's the connection?
Well, he was a customer at the restaurant where Moren worked, too. And turns out George Smith had this thing for Moren. Wanted to be her sugar daddy. Was always hitting on her, even offered to help get her husband out of prison.
Oh, wow. That just establishes this connection, this potential power dynamic between them, right? Puts them right on the radar.
Exactly. And then there's this rumor about Moren's missing shoes. Supposedly, they were found in George Smith's closet. But this was never officially confirmed.
Oh, really? Why not?
Apparently, because supposedly this information came out without a search warrant. So it was considered like inadmissible hearsay.
Ah, so it couldn't be used against him in court, even if it was true.
Right. So even if there was something to that rumor, it wouldn't help the investigation. And what's even creepier is that George Smith would show up at the police station all the time wanting updates on the case.
Huh. So he was very interested in the case.
Yeah, very. And for investigators, that was a huge red flag.
Yeah.
Like, it mirrored the behavior of some criminals, right? Drawn back to the scene, can't stay away.
Oh, that's interesting.
But even with all the suspicion around George Smith, the police just couldn't get enough solid evidence to arrest him. So the investigation stalled, leaving Moren's family in this horrible limbo. And that's where Moren's younger sister, Lisa, comes in.
Okay.
This trauma of losing her sister, the frustration with the unsolved case, it all had this huge impact on Lisa. She ends up joining law enforcement, wanting to help others find the answers that her family was denied.
Wow.
It's amazing how she turned her grief into action, right? Even while she's working as an officer, she never let go of Moren's case, kept it alive, advocating for her sister, reminding everyone that she hadn't been forgotten. She even reached out to a journalist, someone who specialized in these cold cases in Iowa.
Wow, she was really determined. So did anything come of that?
Well, then the early 2000s roll around, and there's a big development that changes everything. The rise of DNA technology.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting, I bet.
Totally. Investigators could finally get a male DNA profile from the crime scene. Finally, a concrete lead.
Yeah, finally. So what happened next?
Well, initially, that DNA profile didn't match anyone in the databases. It seemed like another dead end.
Oh, no, really?
Yeah, just another delay in a case already full of them. But then this dedicated detective named Matt Denlinger, he takes over the case.
Detective Denlinger.
He was determined to solve it. Started collecting DNA samples, like meticulously,
Yeah.
from over 20 potential suspects.
Wow, that's
It
dedication.
was a long, slow process. But he wasn't giving up.
Good for him.
But years pass. And Lisa, well, she's nearing retirement now. And she starts to have doubts. Had she actually made a difference? Would her sister's case ever be solved?
Can you imagine that feeling? A lifetime of trying to get justice, fueled by this personal tragedy, and still the answer feels so out of reach.
It really shows the emotional weight of these unsolved cases, not just for the families, but also for those who spend their lives searching for the truth.
Yeah, I can see that.
I know, right? It's amazing how doubt can creep in, even when you've dedicated so much of your life to something. But then, just when Lisa's having these doubts, Detective Denlinger gets this major breakthrough.
Oh, wow. So what happened? Did they finally find a match for that DNA profile?
They did. It pointed straight back to George Smith. But there's another twist, and it's not a good one.
What? Don't tell me. He's dead.
He died in 2013. After 50 years of waiting, the Brewbaker family finally has their answer. But the guy who did it, he's gone. There's no way to get justice in, the traditional sense.
It highlights this painful truth about these cases, Sometimes justice delayed really is justice denied.
It really is. And it makes you think about all the people who never got to see this resolution. Moren's father and her brother, they both passed away before George Smith was identified. They were both so consumed by the grief and the need for answers.
It's a reminder of how deep these ripple effects go, right? The trauma of violent crime, it echoes through generations far beyond the immediate victim.
It does. But there was something kind of poignant that happened. Moren's father and brother, they were both buried in the same plot as Moren.
Oh, wow. So they were finally reunited.
Yeah.
That's really beautiful.
And there was this moment during the burial. 3 deer appeared at the cemetery, like almost as a symbol of peace.
Gives you chills, doesn't it?
It really does. So, looking back at this 50-year journey, what does it tell us about our justice system?
Well, I think Morin's case really shows how far we've come, you know? It highlights the incredible power of forensic science, DNA technology especially, and it shows how important it is to have dedicated investigators, like Detective Denlinger, the ones who refuse to give up on these cold cases.
It's true. And for me, it's also a testament to the strength of family. Lisa's dedication to her sister's case, her mother's unwavering belief that they'd get justice, the way they support each other through this unimaginable pain. That's what sticks with me.
I hear you. And we can't forget the community support either. The neighbors who came together to help the Brewbakers, the church donating the burial plot. It's a good reminder that compassion can make a difference, even when things are at their darkest.
100%. This case is a mix of tragedy and resilience.
Yeah.
And this unwavering pursuit of truth. And going back to those rumors about Moren's shoes, the ones that were supposedly found in George Smith's closet, even though it was never confirmed.
Yeah.
Well, if it's true, it just adds another layer to this whole story.
And it makes you think, right? Like, what other evidence might have been missed or overlooked or deemed inadmissible? How do we ensure a thorough investigation, but also, uphold due process? It's a tough balance to strike.
It really is. And it makes you wonder, what if DNA technology had been around back in '71? Would they have solved Moren's case sooner? Could they have spared her family decades of pain? I mean, we can't know for sure, but it does make you think about how far we've come and how far we still have to go.
It does. And that brings us back to you, dear listener. What part of Moren's story stood out to you? How do you think this case reflects, how our justice system has changed? What does it tell us about the importance of family, of memory, the enduring power of truth?
Those are some heavy questions.
They are.
But that's what we do here on The Deep Dives, right? We explore these complex issues, and hopefully, you walk away with more to think about than when you started.
Exactly. We don't have all the answers. We're not here to tell you what to think. We just want to get those wheels turning, encourage some critical thinking.
So as you continue to process everything we've talked about today, I want to leave you with one final thought. We often focus on the pursuit of justice in these cases. But what about healing and reconciliation? Are those even possible? And if so, how?
Yeah, and what does it mean for a family to find peace when the person responsible, can't be held accountable in court? These are the questions that challenge us as individuals and as a society.
We've covered a lot today in this deep dive into Moren Brewbaker's case. The investigation, the impact on her family, the role of forensic science. And we've touched on those bigger themes of justice and healing and the search for truth.
It's been a journey. We hope you've gained some new insights and perspectives. This case is complex and compelling. And as always, we encourage you to keep talking about it, share your thoughts, maybe even have a conversation with some friends. Let's all try to get a better understanding of the world around us.
So next week, we're switching gears completely, ready for a different kind of deep dive.
Bring it on. What are we diving into?
We're exploring the world of culinary innovation. We'll be talking cutting-edge food tech, maybe even touch on some controversial stuff.
That sounds fascinating.
So until next week, stay curious, keep exploring, and maybe try something new in the kitchen.
And keep those critical thinking skills sharp.
It's interesting. We've been talking about all this, justice delayed, the family's long wait, that bittersweet resolution in Moren's case. But before we move on to next week's deep dive, I kind of wanted to go back to something you mentioned earlier about societal attitudes, back in '71. Do you think things have actually changed much? I mean, in terms of how missing persons cases are handled, especially when it comes to young women?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think we've definitely made some progress, for sure. But there's still a long way to go, I think. I mean, that stereotype of the runaway girl, it's still out there. And it can really affect how these cases are perceived, right? Especially at the beginning of the investigation.
Yeah, it's like we need to constantly check ourselves, Our assumptions, our biases, everyone deserves to be heard, right? Taken seriously, no matter how old they are or what their situation is.
Exactly. And Moren's case really shows us how important empathy is, understanding. We can't just look at labels, we need to see the individual, the human story behind every missing person's case.
Yeah, that's powerful. Moren's story reminds us that justice isn't just about, catching the bad guy. It's about acknowledging the victim, their life, their impact on the people who love them.
Absolutely. It's about remembering them, seeking the truth, and working towards a future where these kinds of tragedies, well, hopefully they happen less often.
I like that. So on that note, I think it's time to switch gears. Get ready for a totally different deep dive next week. Ready to explore the world of culinary innovation.
I am. My taste buds are ready. What are we diving into?
We're going to be looking at some cutting-edge food tech. Might even stir up a little controversy. So, until next week, everyone, stay curious, keep exploring, and maybe try something new in the kitchen.
And keep those minds sharp. See you next time.